Good morning, Ashok Malik ji. It is so good to have you here on our special interview for the India Foundation Journal.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Very happy to be invited.
Our theme this month is on Viksit Bharat 2047. So I want to discuss a few areas around how we go about achieving it, because that gives us less than, I think, 2 decades.
Yes, actually, 22 years.
So that's very, very ambitious. And of course, to achieve the kind of goals that we have to be a developed nation, there are so many markers, whether it's technology, whether it's social cohesion. We've seen quite a bit of disruption in the last few years. So let me ask you with the first question that comes to my mind, which is social cohesion, which I feel is really important towards a developed country. However, there's been a lot of talk and concern about illegal immigration into the country. They say that there is approximately 20 million illegal immigrants already in the country, a lot of them with networks that are vast and complex with anti-India elements, whether it's terrorist organizations or also groups like the Rohingyas. How do you think India can tackle this problem of this sort of illegal immigration coming in? Also, how can it protect itself from the networks that are already within?
Look, this actually calls for something more than a simple, have a better border patrolling answer. If you consider Bharat or India as a civilization, what are we going through in the current times, in the post-47 phase or the post-1950 phase? A vast ancient civilization which had a lot of ambiguity to its frontiers, for instance, is crystallizing into a modern nation state. It's not an easy process, it's a challenging process. Okay. For example, fairly open borders with migrants coming in, not sometimes as invaders, I appreciate that, but much more often as traders, as migrants, as pilgrims, back and forth. This has been a part of our history. Now, obviously, in a modern 21st century environment, this is not sustainable. It needs to be curbed to the degree necessary, not possible, but necessary. However, India is also the biggest economy, the biggest country, the biggest magnet in the Indian subcontinent, or what some people prefer to call South Asia. I prefer calling it the Indian subcontinent. As such, not integration, but interlinkages with our neighboring countries, whether social, cultural, or economic, making them part of the broader Indian economy, as a mechanism to enhance connectivity, which benefits us as well. Okay, especially if you look at the states of the Northeast, access does come through border countries. Okay, for instance, or someday if Pakistan sorts out its terrorism problem, a normal economic exchanges to Pakistan's benefit and the benefit of our state of Punjab. Of course, I don't see that happening right now. But what we need to do, what we are trying to achieve, is solidifying our borders, crystallizing our borders, which have not been crystallized for thousands of years, till the modern Indian nation state, in a sense. Securing our borders, curbing illegal immigration, while incentivizing legal immigration which meets genuine economic and labor needs in our country. All of these processes have to work in parallel. It's complex. It's not easy. I don't think India can afford an open border. I don't think it can afford a Great Wall of India either. There is a halfway house which we will have to live with for our own needs and our own gains. This is as much a negotiation between India and its neighbors as, frankly, a discussion we have to have with ourselves. Okay? And what are the metrics or parameters of how much do you open and how much do you not open? Quite honestly, it differs from border to border, from neighboring country to neighboring country, region to region. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. So, quite honestly, the view of the frontiers from Delhi and the view of the frontiers from the frontiers is very different.
Correct. But you speak about the borders, and we know that we have some of the largest borders that any country has, which are open, that are porous. We are also surrounded by countries that are in a flux, to say the very least. We've also seen with recent developments on our borders, especially on the northeastern borders, that there's been this sort of it's been a complicated relationship in terms of should we shut it down, should we not, what should the process be, how do you envision infrastructure on the borders? While we've made a lot of headway in our infrastructural developments in these border areas, but there is a certain amount of further sort of thinking that we need to do to safeguard our borders in terms of infrastructure.
Look, infrastructure at our borders is something which we ignored and neglected for years. We took a defensive posture in it, arguing that we couldn't afford it because it was that much more difficult to and logistically impossible, much more difficult to take construction material to the border, and also that it would incentivize invading armies, okay, which was a very defensive strategy. Over the past 10 years, one of the great achievements of the Narendra Modi government has been serious upgrading of border infrastructure, which is needed, which has sometimes caused other countries to get more alarmed than they needed to be, given that countries like China have built much greater infrastructure for longer. But it's important not just for military posture, it's also important to integrate our communities, Indian citizens living in border regions with the rest of the economy. That's also important, okay? Because otherwise they are neither here nor there. They're left in an isolated limbo. Third, with those countries, especially countries to our east, and I know there's a challenge with Bangladesh today, which we have to take a tough stand on, but we have also achieved a lot with Bangladesh under previous governments. With Nepal, there is an up and down relationship, but there have been achievements. With Bhutan too, there have been achievements. With the Maldives and Sri Lanka, things are looking better today. Given all of this, and I realize I'm talking about sea borders as well as land borders, given all of this, infrastructure at our borders to build connectivity, which enables commerce, enables economic interchange, and incentivizes those countries and those societies too to live peacefully, equitably with India. Because if the economic stakes for a good relationship with India are significant, then the willingness to allow their politicians to do something reckless will be much more limited. So, for a country like India to deal with this neighborhood is a combination of the iron fist and the velvet glove. You need coercion when it's needed. Absolutely. Like right now in Bangladesh, given what is happening, given the fact that Bangladesh is not being fair to its minorities, which has an immediate social impact in India, given that Bangladesh is flirting with Pakistan and China, we have to take a tough stand. And we have taken a tough stand. I suspect it will get tougher. On the other hand, where the environment is more welcoming, like currently it is in Sri Lanka, we should incentivize a close relationship. And if that means enhancing border infrastructure or connectivity corridors, yes, of course we should do that. So there is no one answer for all countries of the region. There is no one answer for all times for any one country either. It changes with posture, with the other country's posture.
Correct. But then what interests me is that while we talk about these other countries and what we should be doing with them and taking a tough stance and when necessary, and as we have done so, but we've also faced sort of repercussions, in terms of we have international major powers, whether it's cross-border issues or internal issues. We have major powers that almost, it seems like, want to counter a rising India, want to counter an assertive India. We've seen this happen during farmers' protests. We've seen this happen during CEA, so on and so forth. Why do you think that happens, and how do you think we should be reacting to it?
The world doesn't owe you a living. If you are a rising star, you will face challenges, even from friends who would want you to rise only up to a certain point. That's how it is in an office environment. That's how it is in the ruthless world of global politics. You have to secure, your interest. You have to secure your core priorities, and they are non-negotiable. We are moving to a world where they say that spheres of influence is coming back as a concept, as opposed to globalization, which made for a flatter world. Okay, I don't know whether this is true, because I don't want to make a prediction too early in the process. But presuming it is even halfway true, we need to have a much greater influence and grip in our own neighborhood. If that requires taking on even bigger powers who are outside the region, or who are maybe friendly with us in other areas, we should be willing to do that. A former American Secretary of State at a conference in India a couple of years ago said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. If the Americans can do it, so can Indians.
Absolutely.
We can have bhel puri and walk at the same time.
Absolutely, I agree, especially with the bhel puri. But, we've also made huge advances in digitization. I think that's been one of our really fantastic success stories. And this government has really managed to put our digitization story on the map. But that also brings about some vulnerabilities which are manipulated in our weaker moments. What do you think those challenges are? And again, how do you think we should be looking at it for the next 22 years?
This is a good point you raised, because if you ask me what is my nightmare security scenario for the proximate future, much more than a nuclear attack, it is possibly a devastating cyber attack which cripples our financial systems. Okay, or brings, and the whole concept of what is critical infrastructure for a country. In the old days, critical infrastructure may have been Bombay High, or a steel plant. We have 4 or 5 very legacy steel plants in the private sector and the public sector, which are iconic, and we have other industrial sort of facilities which are iconic. But the whole definition of critical infrastructure has today changed to include our digital backbone, undersea cables, for instance, which we are part of as part of a global consortium. Okay, so certainly and separately in our use and adoption of the internet, whether it is social media, whether it is email, we are also vulnerable to manipulation, as are other countries. I'm not saying we are the only ones, okay, as are other countries. And given that we have digitized so rapidly and so impressively, given that many other countries in the global south are looking at aspects of India's digitization, they probably don't want the whole India stack, but they want parts of it, whatever suits them. It is for us to be at the frontiers of cybersecurity. And here I would say that our partnerships, our global partnerships, whether with the European countries, whether with France or with the US particularly, especially in the domain of cybersecurity, a partnership mediated by many Indian tech workers, cybersecurity workers who are working in the Indo-US tech corridor, is something I have a lot of hope for. At the simplest level, all our public and private institutions need to spend more and spend more smartly on cybersecurity. We had a cyber attack on the AIMS Delhi database some years ago, and obviously it was that database is rich. It has patient records, it has epidemiological tools, data available, which is very, very rich. And obviously not sufficient care had been given or thought had been given. I'm not blaming anybody here. It was but it should serve as a wake-up call. Cybersecurity is, if you ask me, and a cyber attack, a crippling cyber attack, is my nightmare scenario, much more than a nuclear attack.
Absolutely, I'll have to agree with you. I think considering how dependent we are, the common man is, on our digital infrastructure, I think we are only as good as the last attack, But let me shift a little bit to technology as well. Some would say that we completely missed the industrial revolution bus, and we shouldn't miss the technology revolution bus. Whether it's AI, whether it's the semiconductor industry, whether it's quantum computing, there's a certain amount of resources that are needed. How do you think we can compete with other countries? Where do you think we are lacking? And how fast do we need to move on this?
We have more resources today than we did 20 years ago. I'll tell you what I mean by that. The other day I was talking about, this is slightly unrelated to your answer, but I'll come back to your answer. I was talking about Hyundai, which last year raised money in India in what was India's largest IPO. Hyundai came to India in 1995, I think about 95, okay, or mid-90s after. I would estimate India's GDP at that point was about $400 million. $400 billion, I'm sorry. Okay? Because in 1991 our GDP was 275 billion, so I'm assuming it had gone down to 400 million by the mid-90s. Today our GDP is 4 trillion, it's 10 times larger. Simply more capital is available, which is why from being an investor that brought in money in the 1990s, Hyundai is today raising money in India. Now, if you look at semiconductors, which is a very vast and resource intensive ecosystem, from chemicals and materials at the base to a full-fledged fab at the top, we are at the third or fourth echelon of a skyscraper at the moment. But 20 months ago, we weren't even at groundbreaking. So we have made appreciable progress, there is much more to go. We have brought in technology from other countries, but much of the investment has actually been Indian money, Indian public money, Indian taxpayer money, some Indian private money. So capital is certainly needed, and I'm not suggesting we don't need capital from abroad, of course we do, especially for AI partnerships with global companies, all of whom want to test their models, and they have different models on India or with India, not on India but with India, and we must allow them access and workable relationships that work for them and work for us as well. That will bring in capital, that will bring in investment. I don't think money is as much of a problem, whether global money or local money, as deploying that money smartly. And you're quite right on semiconductors, which are now seen as a metric of national security, and we saw that during COVID. Car waiting list in India were up to a year because there were no semiconductor legacy chips available. We need them for electronics, automobile industry, which is what we are focusing on. Quantum computing, which is still emerging, but is there, is around the corner, we know it. And artificial intelligence, of course, which has enormous social, it's not just artificial intelligence for the sake of weaponization, but frankly it has enormous social implications to enable better lives, for our farmers, for our students, for our people generally, for governance. So, a controversial suggestion here would be, at some point we need to bring AI into our judicial proceedings, to rather than have one person go through copious documentation, how about a filter using AI? I suspect it will be better than a lot of people want to believe.
Do you think we need an overarching commission, like maybe the the atomic
for AI?
energy commission? Just
for new technologies. I think, to be honest, there are groups within the government which bring in private sector people as well, because much of the technology here does lie with the private sector, to be honest, which are working. Our semiconductor mission, for instance, uses government people and uses private sector people, including people of Indian origin living abroad. Okay? The AI mission similarly is looking at a more inclusive, collaborative formulation. There's a big AI conference we're hosting next year, I think early next year, February next year, if I'm not mistaken, which is also seen as AI for impact and inclusion. So I don't think you can have one big technology commission, but each of these areas will require a collaborative process, and to be honest, some of that is happening. Maybe it can happen better, but it's there.
Well, that's good to hear. We also, a nation like ours needs a very robust defense sector. I think that would add to the kind of assets that we need for developing, to achieve the goals that we want to achieve by 2047. Do you think we're on the right track, or do you think there are some challenges?
We are both on the right track and there are challenges. Okay? It's like this. For many years, for a variety of reasons, some of which were of our doing, some of which were not of our doing, there's been a Russia dependency or a Soviet dependency before that to our military platforms. We have now diversified. We get platforms from France, we get platforms from Italy, from the US, of course, we get platforms from Israel. But we don't want to substitute one dependency with another dependency. In the end, we will need to buy. Of course, every country needs to buy military platforms or defense equipment or munitions. But we also want to make at least a sufficient critical mass on our own. We want to make our own platforms, which we are starting to do with aircraft carriers, for instance. And we're moving up the value chain. But no one's going to hand it to you on a platter, even your best friend. They would want to keep the crown jewels with them. So if you look at, for example, jet engine technology, we are working with the Americans, we are working with the French, there's some talk of working with the British also. No one's going to give you 100%. You will have to work with all of them and triangulate and still have a gap which you then have to fill yourself. I do feel a strong defense manufacturing sector, which is one of the big priorities of this government, to be honest, and they've made some progress on it, intersects very strongly with a modern industrial economy. The two go together. If you have a strong defense sector, you will have a manufacturing economy. If you have a manufacturing economy, a switch to defense manufacturing is natural and easy. The two go together. And in a sense, the defense manufacturing or the defense production or the Atmanirbharta in defense initiative will be a test of how successful we are in lifting manufacturing indices in our country.
So I think there's we've achieved quite a bit. There's a little way further to go to achieve our goals by 2047. As we're running out of time, let me just ask you one final question. To make all of this happen, we need systems that work. That includes our bureaucracy. Do you think we're on the right track, or do you think more lateral inclusions are needed, where we find intelligentsia from, by subject expertise, maybe?
See, I worked 5 years in the government as a lateral entrant, and it was an enormous learning process for me. I think I managed to contribute somewhat, at least I hope I did. But having said that, every country, and whether it's the US or whether it's sort of China, any model, any country needs a permanent bureaucracy. So I don't think lateral entrants can be a substitute for permanent bureaucracy. They can be a complement, they can add on, they can come for short periods, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, bring the expertise and then move out. And they will move out, because a career bureaucrat, a career civil servant thinks differently. I'm not saying he thinks better or thinks worse, he just thinks differently, and that is also needed in the system, because he is a more cautious person, his training or his or her training is more cautious. Some of that caution is needed. sometimes that caution becomes an end in itself, which is problematic. So I do believe more people from outside should come in. I also believe people from government should be allowed, as they are in many countries, European countries especially, to go to the private sector for a couple of years. Okay. The osmosis should be what osmosis is meant to be, two-way. Because otherwise we are producing two cultures which barely interact. Okay. And that is not good for either government or for the private sector, because there simply is a understanding gap in how the other decides what his or her motivations are, what the private sector's motivations are, what the civil service motivations are, and these are genuine motivations. These are not, this is not that I don't want to do something for the sake of not doing it. I'll give you one example. When I joined my first couple of months in government, there was a decision to be taken. I made a recommendation which for me seemed straightforward. I kept getting questions time after time from my senior, and initially I got irritated. I said, is he trying to just rile me up because I'm an outsider? I realized what he was doing was idiot proofing my decision, so that come down, give every possible justification so that no one down the line can ever raise a question. So I realized what he was doing. He was teaching me. So now, should our system be so laborious that it takes that long to take a decision that is fairly straightforward? I agree. I mean, that's a fair question. Does our system need to be a little more careful because it's taxpayer money than you would be in, say, the private sector or in a foundation? That is also true. So there is no one answer. I also feel that the quality of ministers matters. Unfortunately, in India, the skills you need to get elected to parliament and the skills you need to govern are increasingly divergent, and that too poses a challenge.
Well, on that note, one can hope that, like you said, that this osmosis is very necessary for better functioning. I think it will give an insight to even the bureaucrats if they were allowed to go into the private sector to see where we are at, because I think there's a sort of cocooning when you're in the bureaucracy. So, well, on that note, thank you so much, Ashok ji, for coming here and giving us this much of insight. You've been in the government, and this really is an insider's point of view. So thank you very much, and I hope to have you again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I hope that was useful.
It was.